Okay, again, thanks to Pierre Steinbrück for putting the CeBIT Global Conferences on his itinerary today. It is an election year here in Germany. The public sphere and technology, the role of the state and technology, the role of citizens and consumers in technologies, all of those converge here on center stage. Now, yesterday in our Smart Solutions for a Smarter World panel, we talked a lot about the role of government in providing intelligent infrastructures for transport and healthcare. And we talked about the role of consumers in demanding these infrastructures and perhaps paying for them as well. We also heard from Hamid Akavan from Siemens Enterprise Communications about ways to use new technology to improve teamwork. Alian Dorland from Shell told us how crowdsourcing is now helping his company come up with better ways to meet energy demands. Well, there is a common thread in all of these topics that we would like to put front and center today, and that is sharing. Now, all of the ideas that we pondered yesterday, they all rely on greater sharing. And we talk about this as if it were something new in human history, but the truth is, it's not anything new at all. Our first keynote speaker is here to tell us why. He is a man whose musings on information will not only make you pause and think, but it will probably also make you smile. I like him because he says he has two passions, information and food. He's a smart man. Please give a warm welcome to the Chief Scientist at Salesforce.com, Mr. J.P. Rangaswami.
Thank you very much. Thank you and good morning. It's always a privilege to be able to come back to Germany and to spend time with people here. I spent the best part of 10 years working for German institutions, so I feel I am at home. If you tried at an audience like this to start counting the number of social media experts in the world, they would probably exceed the population of China. So when we're in an environment like this, I thought we should concentrate like scientists do on evidence, what we're learning from actually looking at facts and what's happening there rather than just on the emotion. Right? The first question I wanted to ask myself was, a few days ago, it kept repeating in my life. I was listening to some music, and I'm 55 years old, so I like my music on vinyl. I use valve amplifiers when I can because I feel I get a better quality of music listening that way. And my 21-year-old son, he pointed out to me that he can't listen to music that way. So I asked him why. Don't you think it sounds better with this system? There is greater fidelity. And he said, it's not about that. I can't share it. Okay? So there is a generation of people there, and it's not necessarily age-based. It's not necessarily culture-based. It's not necessarily geography-based, whose ideas about how they live their lives are deeply connected to sharing. Here, over the next 25 minutes, I want to be able to take you through the answers to 3 questions. Question 1. Is this idea of sharing new? If not, why not? Question 2, is sharing good? Should we share? And question 3, if we know the answers to the first 2 questions, what should we do? If by the time I leave this stage you have a reasonable understanding of those 3 questions and you're satisfied in your own head with the answers, then I would have got somewhere. Thank you for your patience in between. Okay, let's start with, I was born and brought up in Calcutta. In Calcutta, you queued up to be born, you queued up to die. It's a vertically intense city. Many, many people, queues everywhere. Privacy was a rare thing to have in that kind of environment. But when I actually look at what this picture represents, it reminded me of how my life was when I was a child. Okay? If I went to the local shop at the age of 6 and I said, could I have a packet of cigarettes, please? The shopkeeper gave me the cigarettes. I didn't carry any money. I didn't need to. The shopkeeper knew which brand to give and who it was for because he knew my father, he knew my grandfather, he knew where I lived, he knew the family. And we knew his family. So culturally, even though I lived in a city, I lived in a community where everybody knew each other, and it was normal for people to have a clear understanding of what you did, where you lived, what your habits were, what your values were, because we lived in that kind of integrated, transparent society. Okay? And this was, I was born in 1957. I'm talking about 1963, not that long ago. What changed, in my opinion, is that culturally, human beings, from the time we formed settlements between 300,000 and 100,000 years ago, we lived in communities where it was normal for people to know each other, their friends, their lifestyles. Everyone in the town or community knew, who had the nut allergy, who had a drinking problem, who liked to read books. Who liked curry, for that matter. I mean, your tastes were known to people, and the community responded by being able to deliver value against those tastes. People invested in relationships over time. Everywhere I went when I was a child, the person serving me knew me, knew my family, because we went to similar places. Even then, when we walked around as children, we knew where the curtains were that people were looking through or behind. So you knew who the gossips were, you knew who was looking at you, but it didn't matter because you knew who it was. The reason why I bring these things up is, if human beings had this structure for this long, what changed? Why did we have all this issue to do with how people look at each other in today's context? And what it looks like it happened is that in the 19th century, transportation technology became affordable at a mass level. So for hundreds of thousands of years, we used to be born, live, and die within 10 miles of where we were born. Then suddenly, the bicycle, the train, the car, much later, things like planes, we started evolving transportation technologies that allowed people to leave. So a diaspora of our original communities began, and that diaspora drove an existence where we were suddenly distributed, we were separate, we were no longer in the close communities. And when we started doing that, you know what happened? We tried to rebuild the community in the town we left. Because we would go into a new environment, and in the big city, there will be like a Chinatown or a Koreatown, or people from the same environment would gang together and create new communities, even in the larger cities, because human nature is to form those relationships. The shops would then sell the goods you needed to make your food, your language or dialect would be understood. We are creatures who are social creatures. But what changed for the first time is you could go far enough for nobody to know you. So for a short period in human history, we had this, when you were living in the village, when we as human beings were living in the village, you had to travel quite far before nobody knew you. So if you wanted to do something that nobody else should know, you had to travel 2, 3, 4 villages away and hope you didn't meet anybody that night who knew you, because someone else may have had the same idea. But generally, everybody knew everybody. That was life. So why is it happening now again? I think there were some changes that took place that I want to sort of talk through quickly. First and foremost, as people left, we could see that the technology for transport started changing the way villages and towns looked to get to cities. Markets formed, and markets actually didn't form inside towns. They formed outside because the rules and the shapes of the towns were not appropriate. Open gardens, walled gardens were not the way markets were formed. In fact, the Greek word for the marketplace is agora, and the modern term for being scared of open spaces is agoraphobia. Okay? It comes from the open market, which, as you can see, was always built outside the town, not inside. As we started congregating in the towns and villages, we were always able to know each other, be part of each other, even when we scaled up. This idea of the modern city where two neighbors don't know each other was as distance grew and you could separate out. A very, very new thing which is less than 150 years old, to say your transportation technology was good enough for you to get far enough away from all the people who knew you so that you had some perceived concept of privacy. In that kind of market, how did the community work? Well, if your barn burnt down, the community worked together to rebuild it. They housed you. You didn't have an insurance company or anything. They would house you, they would feed you, and the community would build the barn back with you. Okay? We were used to working together for sharing our lives, for sharing our food, for sharing even our accidents. This is not new. Sharing has been at the heart of humanity from everywhere I look, ever since we started forming settlements. And that collective ability to say, the premium you paid, if you want to think in an insurance context, was participation in the community. And the claim that you made was when something went wrong, the community helped you. But we were and are and continue to be participative human beings who are social. The word society itself reflects it. So the first question that I want you guys to bear in mind and understand the answer to is, no, sharing is not new. Sharing is inbuilt in our culture from the time we started forming settlements and communities. It is the way we used to live, and until very recently was the only way we could live. The change that took place was transportation technology becoming affordable. The reason why it is coming back now is because that transportation technology has now been caught up with communications technology. Okay? We need to consider that. If you look at what's happening in that picture over there, people are sharing food. One of the shocks to me is that in many Western cities, dining tables are not necessarily common in homes anymore. Because the idea that you sit with other people to share food isn't that common. If that is progress, I leave it to you to figure out what the next generation would do. But the truth is, my children, the generations to come, are back to creating a sharing rather than an isolation, because they no longer think they have to own their own goods. They are actually into rental, into participative, into sharing. Culture meant that from the time we started being settled human beings in communities, that's the way we worked. So what we shared was life. We weren't talking about sharing our music or our television or the books we read or our cars or our bicycles or anything. Human beings were designed to share life. No man is an island. Okay? And it is not new, it is through human history. So whenever you think about what's all this sharing got to do, please bear in mind, there have been generations of people who are saying, why are people not sharing? That shared life, as I indicated, said it began to break down because we had transportation technology. As we migrated and created this diaspora, it broke down. That is actually a picture of the nature of migrations that take place today. Okay? Because as the transportation technology has become more and more affordable, human migration is proceeding at a pace that is quite unusual. But what does it create? It appears to create individuals in cities who are isolated, alone in a big crowd. And that was the way life was being intended. When we start looking through that, the Post and Telegraph were some of the early systems start saying, when you have distance, how do you recommunicate? But it was primitive, It took time. But not that long ago, 100 years ago, the only way you could keep in contact over distance was that. Then we started saying, let's have better communications technology, and we could start making calls. And when I was growing up, the way you spoke to anyone, you had any communication with people over distance, was the telephone. The computer started changing some of that. It reached a stage where today, the smart mobile phone is the traditional way people engage. My mother is on Facebook. She keeps in touch with her grandchildren that way, and she sees it normal. But her parent, her dad, used to keep in touch with me by letter, not even by phone, because that was the culture he was brought up with. My wife hates Facebook. But when my 21-year-old son went on a traveling tour of 4 months, every day she was asking me, can we have a look at his Facebook, please? Okay? It's all to do with culture and sharing. You can say, I don't do instant messaging, I don't do Facebook, I don't do Twitter, I don't do email, all that's okay. But it's the multi-channel element of this to saying tools started coming up to reconnect people that had got disconnected because of transportation. Now we're all connected, okay? As a child, if someone told me everyone will have a computer, I'd have said, no, why should everyone have a mainframe? Then the PC came along. No one actually believed that every home will have a PC. But when the mobile phone has come along and the smart devices come along, now it is possible for us to think that actually in our lifetimes, every human being will have a phone, right? Even at the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona a few days ago, people were talking about the price point for a smart device coming down to $13. Okay? Where is the digital divide? When I was living in India, it took me 3 years to get a landline. Now I can get a mobile phone there in 3 minutes. Okay? People leapfrog those technologies. Communications, farmers are getting prices by checking on the internet through a cheap phone, right? In order to get competitive. So what has happened is that in the last 40 years, communications technology has caught up so much that the distribution that took place through transportation technologies, mass affordability, has been rebalanced by the mass affordability of communications technology. Everyone's connected. So what does that actually imply? Early on, you started connecting markets, shopkeepers, people who wanted to buy and sell, because we forget that always in human history, people buy from people, people sell to people. It's always been a people business. You understand the relationship, you know what the person stands for. And it is the relationship that happens before the conversation, before the transaction. Okay? My image of markets has always been, hi, how are you? Come sit down, have a cup of coffee. Has your aunt's leg healed? And is that dog of yours still sick? And by the way, I got some carpets yesterday. Do you want to take a look at them? Your father had expressed an interest. So the conversation was, I know who you are. Let's sit down. Let's relax. It's not, here's my latest product. It's faster, cheaper, better than anybody else. If you're not interested, I'll go to the next person. Buying and selling was always in relationship. Business was about relationships. And these relationships based on deep knowledge and trust. That's how human beings acted. No surprise that as the web began, one of the first things we wanted to do was rediscover our friends. Because again, we were wanting to use the technology to recreate what we had. Okay? This recreation becomes important. As I said, we were sharing life. As we get reconnected in this trust revolution, the issues that we start thinking about now takes me on to this second question. Is it good? Now that we know all this about each other and we can know more about each other, is it good? And I'll tell you why I think it's good. I've lived through a life of many great things, I still remember how, as a child, I loved being on a plane and looking out, or how I felt when I saw man land on the moon, the changes that have taken place in my 55 years. But I heard one thing that made me sit up and say, I never want to hear that again. And that was, I could be the first generation in human history where my children will have a shorter lifespan than me. Okay? Up to now, human beings have always got an increased lifespan. We've had progress in terms of health and nutrition and water and availability for the next generation to live longer. People have gotten taller and fitter. Wherever you go, you say human history has gone that way. When I go to a 400-year-old house and say, were people that small? I may not be tall, but in India I'm tall. Okay? And I'm taller than my father, and my father was taller than him. So I've seen this idea of how we've got, taller, fitter, more resolute, more protected against disease, higher nutrition, lower infant mortality, longer longevity, etc. And then suddenly I get told, sorry, we have a problem, right? We have problems to do with disease. Diseases we thought we had conquered are coming back, and we're not investing enough in being able to solve those. Nutrition is a problem. Obesity has become the new challenge of society rather than malnutrition. Right? We have problems with water. We have problems with energy. We have problems with so by the time you say disease control, water, energy, food, our diet, our lifestyle, we're not getting enough exercise, and they're saying that my children are going to live less, then I'm interested. They have my full attention to say how to solve it. Now, solving this requires global action, and many of the global organizations we've had have found it difficult to operate when people don't share. Okay, I'll give you an example. When I was young, the term that was used to deal with what we call today climate change, what 10 years ago was global warming, the term used was a hole in the ozone layer. Okay? And I was told, yep, there's a hole in the ozone layer, and it's caused by chlorofluorocarbons, and CFC-producing devices had to be delicensed and stopped in production. This is early 70s. I told you I'm 55. And when I heard that, I said, okay, so the West has figured out that there is a problem. There is the hole in the ozone layer, and they have to stop, because otherwise we could get a lot hotter. We're going to have a problem. So I saw the laws, and they banned it. At the same time as they banned it, they exported the same technology to India. And we started making them. And a part of me sort of said, I don't understand this world, How is the world shaped? Is the ozone layer stuck on top of the West? Is space somehow disconnected from the Earth? Surely the same ozone layer will get affected if we start producing those CFC-producing devices in India. But nobody cared, because we were not connected. Right? Organizations could do things like, if it's illegal in this country, we'll do it somewhere. It's like saying, lead-producing cars start getting exported rather than used. So you pass a set of laws to say pollution is bad, and at the same time, you create lead-producing cars elsewhere. So the challenges of solving healthcare, nutrition, water, energy, climate in general, none of these are going to go away unless we learn to collaborate across borders, to collaborate across cultures, to collaborate across time zones. And to be able to do this, we have to have tools that have to do it. Because if you don't design for it, it's not going to happen. The reason why I talk about not designing for it is, when I was young, if I was on my way home and I decided that I wanted to bring some friends of mine to the house, what would happen is, this is long before mobile phones, I'll just take them home. And when I got home, I'd say, Mom, I got 3 friends. And magically, she did something in the kitchen for there to be enough food for all of us. Okay? A little bit of water in the dal, a little more rice, a few more potatoes. We were vegetarians in the house, but that's what happened. Then I came to England, I got married, I lived in a different culture, still before mobile phones. And on my way home from work, I was talking to some friends, we had a drink, and said, you know what? I'm having some people over for dinner, come on over. And they came. And then my wife looked at me as I opened the door with these 2 other guests, saying, JP, we're having steak. How am I going to feed them? And the child in me realized that sharing has to be by design, because if you didn't have food that was naturally expandable, like a stew, or something that was cooked in a pot, if you counted the number of potatoes or counted the number of chops or counted the number of steaks, then you have limited yourself for the number of people you have unless you've built up a spare, right? You need to plan to be able to share. This is true for everything we do. Sharing requires an architecture of participation, needing to be able, today when you go to a website, okay, it's become normal to say there's a whole family of icons, print it, send to email, send to Twitter, send to Facebook, whatever else you want to do, the ability to be able to share what you are seeing or doing. When you buy a product, again, would you like to share this action you're doing? When you're reading something, would you like to share it? People have begun in the digital world with really understanding this idea of sharing. But how does this sharing work? Sharing just doesn't happen because I'm standing out here and say, I want to share everything I do, right? Too much information. Sharing happens because you see that someone's life can be improved or enhanced as a result of what you say or do. You may not always understand how or why, but you have to understand that you have a responsibility. And the way you use that responsibility is you invest in a trust relationship with the people around you. You recognize and understand that mutual respect and understanding for human dignity takes place. There are social conventions. Like when my children befriend me on Facebook, they know it's okay for me to look at them, but perhaps not talk to them too much. It's not cool. It's okay for me to see what happens in my feed, but if I actually looked at this photograph of the woman that my 21-year-old son was with and I investigated her, as soon as he found out I was prying like that, he would unfriend me because that's not the social expectation. How does that actually work? Well, I go back to something that we would share in analog terms. Imagine you let somebody use your spare bedroom, okay? You would expect that person to sleep in the bed. You allowed them to use the spare bedroom. You would expect that person to use the shower. After all, that's what it's there for. You would expect the person to use the toothpaste that you left there. But perhaps not the toothbrush, because you can't remember who left it there. And he won't use the toothbrush either. But you do not expect that person to open your drawers or look under the bed or open the wardrobes, etc., because you've trusted them to say, I'm giving you the space, but you don't use it as a license to do whatever you want. All forms of sharing are based on this idea of mutual respect for human dignity and a conventional and social representation of what is reasonable or not. In an analog world, we knew who was looking at us, which window twitched. In a digital world, the reason why we spend time on things like data protection is to make sure you know who can see you and what they use it for. But it's not to prevent sharing. That is actually going to underpin the trust of sharing, because when you know those, and those are protections you have, you are encouraged to share. I'm going to end with a very simple repetition of the statements. I believe that sharing is human, natural, that we were unnatural for 150 years, and that communications technology has given us the chance to be natural about sharing again. I believe it is a good thing, because without it, the problems of the 21st century, this new paradigm, are going to be very hard to solve, because we get stupidities like the CFC producing technology export. I believe that it is an imperative that my children live longer than me. I do not want to belong to that generation that turns that. I believe that it cannot happen unless we collectively understand how to design for it and how to protect it. When you hear about the share economy and the sharing revolution for the rest of today and everywhere else, I want you to bear in mind, this is not a technology looking for an answer. This is about our rediscovering our humanity and our lives. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.